to the side and back. My name is Tokiku Uzuru, also known as Toki, and this is going to be, one, not only my last video for the year, but two, part 2 of my retrospective analysis on the album Indigo. I already gave all of the prerequisites of me doing this analysis in the first video, so I'm not going to go ahead and repeat that because we're going to end up taking more time than we actually need here. But before we actually get into this video, I do want to go ahead and point out something that I didn't talk about in the last video. So I do remember bringing up the Dia Beacon performances that RM did for Still Life specifically. Still Life words, and something that I ended up coming across after filming my video and doing research specifically on the sculptures that were in the room that he performed the song in. In the Still Life performance, all of the sculptures were created out of car parts, which I had already thought, but steel car parts. Even more wordplay because of the way that he says still while he's performing the song Still Life. It sounds like steel, which is essentially one of the main, I usually say mediums, but like things that they use in a lot of the sculptures in the Dia Beacon showcase. So we officially start the second half with the song Change Part 2. Why is it called Change Part 2? Because there had already been a song that was, titled Change? That he did. I wish I would have written that down at some point. Did I? And the way I would describe the song, outside of short, but I like it, is industrial sounding. Almost mechanical. And in the Dia Beacon performance, it was underground, and as I watched the performance the second time, what I thought was looked similar to a New York City subway. Did a bit of research on that, and I was completely right. In fact, in the Dia Beacon performance that he did for the song Change Part 2, the sculpture itself was more focused on how light and barricades separate things. The sculpture itself was a bunch of barricades and fluorescent light tubing, and what seemed to have been like an underground subway system in New York. Which, for someone that hasn't gone to New York, I don't understand how I would understand. I don't understand how I would know that. While the song itself is rather short, it definitely shows that there's emphasis on this one idea of everything changes, everybody changes. Kawananai de desu to koko ni te. I've been rewatching Fruits Basket and I will cry. The funnier thing is I'm looking at my notes that I wrote for this, and one of the bullet points was literally lucky ending. Everything changes, everybody changes. It holds the same ideas or principles in this case, but with a more pessimistic, almost cynical acceptance. Which to me, honestly, is a bit of a breath of fresh air for someone that has been cynical for, 8 years? Oh, jeez. Anyway, the song itself, to me, seems like he's looking, Anyway, the song to me seems like someone looking back at all of the decisions, all of the choices that they've made, and how they, at this point in their life, they probably wouldn't be making those type of decisions, or would try to make, or would end up making different decisions. It's not wanting to change the decisions that you've made, but it's knowing that if those situations come up again, you wouldn't be making the same decisions. So the last two things for the song Change that I would like to point out is one, during the deacon. Oh geez. We're mixing words now. During the Dia Beacon performance that he did for the song, something kept on tugging at the back of my brain, and I came up with the phrase cynical narrator. With the sculpture itself that's in the room, specifically being one of the few that has artificial lights, and the fact that there are actually windows in that room or in that space, yet they still had like the outline of him lit by the lights on the sculpture in the background. He becomes this faceless, cynical narrator that is basically sharing some sort of true understanding of exactly what the message in the song is. Things change, people change, everything change. TLDR, if you want to go ahead and know exactly how a spiritual awakening actually feels like, this song is it. Overall, I'd say this entire album is it, but this song specifically. Alright, next one. Number 7, Lonely. The song itself is an entire vibe and an entire mood. If I am putting it on a playlist, it's Sad Boy Hours. It also kind of gives, like, the guitar in the song, I think it sounds like a plucking the strings on an instrument. Gives me Carlos Santana vibes, which kind of makes me happy. Well, the lyrics themselves get real and raw about feeling loneliness. Similar to how Mitski did with the song Nobody. It's just as honest as it can possibly get, and I don't think, again, absolute mood. Number 8, Hectic. It wasn't until I ended up listening to the song that I realized I say this word a lot. When I say the word hectic, I typically mean chaotic, but in a way that's not necessarily negative or positive. It's just like it is all over the place, but not necessarily scattered. And while I do appreciate bringing back city pop from the 80s, the song and the visualizer that goes with it gives off this city night life drive vibe. I literally just had to look at my notes to make sure I said that correctly. But while the lyrics are specifically talking about how crazy it is, either living a life that he does or just living in a city, which I could also understand. There's this one line specifically that stuck with me. I literally had to go ahead, I say literally a lot, and I might just end up doing a count for that. No, that's just going to make even more work for me to have to do. No! The song itself sounds like going into hermit mode. Which actually makes sense, especially with the next song, but we're going to get to that later. It's like everything has just been so overwhelming. Whether that be overwhelmingly positive or overwhelmingly negative, or both, especially when it comes to being in the spot where he was when he wrote this. And with him not necessarily being able to have a calm, restful time, mostly because it's not used to it. Again, brain going all over the place most of the time. Which brings us into track 9, Wildflower. I'm not gonna lie, my brain keeps saying Wildfire, and I'm like, that's a completely different song. Well, the original idea of the title specifically was supposed to be something similar to translated flower works, because fireworks, but it's just like if I take the petals of a flower and yeet it up into the air, it'll fall down, similar to fireworks. Possibly less dangerous depending on how severe your pollen allergy is. But overall, the song specifically talks about wanting to go back into the mode of being a free spirit or being untainted by human hands. I ended up writing all of this success but feeling overall empty. Yikes. I just watched that video where it was talking about where he was, and yeah, he felt so empty. So he's trying to through this album he was trying to find out who the person he actually was. Like, besides the persona that he puts on for public viewing, who is the person behind the persona. Oh my gosh. I actually said that correctly. And the way that I have interpreted the song, especially when it comes to my own experiences, it sounds more like the acknowledgement of losing your drive, desire, or reason as to why you were doing the thing that you started. And the idea of, if losing myself is the price to keep the fame, I don't want it. Well, the lyrics specifically talk about how in losing himself, he lost, in gaining the success, he has lost, honestly, more than he thought. Either lost his reason or found that his reason, the old reason he had, wasn't necessarily strong enough. So he had to go find a new reason. Regardless, while the music video shows this outside beauty inside storm, and continues to do a motif similar to that. Motif, is that the word I'm looking for? It continues the idea of, as much as he's trying his best to go ahead and take in all of the success without getting a swelled head, he is also having to go ahead and deal with the overall storm of emotions that's happening on the inside, with scenes ranging from him being in a field of what's supposed to be wildflowers, going between that and him being closed in what seems to be the eye of an actual storm, then switching over to him on the stage with so many purple lights around, and then just switching back and forth through all of that. The overall arcing idea when it comes to this song is, while the firework ends up getting shot into the sky as BTS was shot into success, he essentially wants to have that emotional come down. He wants to return back to nature, which continues on into the Dia Beacon performance, where he performed the song Wildflower. I kid you not, I keep making this mistake, in an outside showcase room, where it was basically, they planted a whole bunch of trees and stuff, and essentially just allowed it to grow as it did, or allowed most of it to grow as it did, probably doing a bit of shaping here and there. And in fact, one of the trees around where he did the performance I think trees, one of the overall plants, is actually a Japanese barberry. I ended up, again, doing research on this one, which means I literally went to go ahead and look at someone's knowledge when it came to plants, because I don't have that knowledge. One of the plants that were in said garden, as it was called, is a Japanese barberry, which from a gardener's perspective is considered an invasive plant. Listening to this song with earbuds in is another completely different experience than listening to it from a loudspeaker. I am very sensitive to sounds specifically. If we're going with the idea of this entire album is itself a narrative, I would classify the song Wildflower as the final battle. That's exactly how emotionally intense this song feels to me. It's like the final battle in a movie. Which brings us to the last song of the album, number 2, which I've expressed as a decent send-off as the album ends. Specifically giving off the message, no need to look back, you've done your best. The way that I've interpreted the song is there's no need to look back at all of the decisions that you've done because they've brought you up to where you are now, which I've spoken about in a previous video that I did. I think it was the butterfly effect one. And honestly, one of the messages I get from the song is if you can say that you've gone through it, then you've done your best. You've done good. After going through all of this, the song itself, number 2, could also be taken as chapter 2. Basically moving on to the next chapter of your life. With all of the lessons and all of the information you have from what you've gone through, you can now move on, feeling peace and still silence. Your head isn't a chaotic buzz. Now, number 2 also had a Dia Beacon performance. And it took me a while to go ahead and figure out what the connection, whether there was actually a connection from the song to the specific showcase room that he chose to do the performance in for this. But again, as I usually do, I tried my best to go ahead and look further into why the sculpture. And while the showcase, the sculpture itself is titled Torqued Ellipses, I could have said that wrong. And I also ended up just having to search exactly what that meant. So like, for us who don't have a very high level vocabulary, twisted curves, that is literally what it is. While the sculpture itself wants you to be more focused on how it's shaping the space around it, which it also uses steel. Again, going back to the whole joke of the way that he said steel in still life, it honestly uses the bended steel as a way to redirect and show movement through space. Honestly, working on a person's spatial awareness and spatial perception. And as the song sounds more like the end of the day roll credits type, end of a movie roll credits, it also talks more about moving on to the next chapter, closing the chapter that you had just finished so you can move on to the next one. And with all of that, I'm done with this. Needless to say, this album itself, especially when it came out for me, has been very enlightening. Not just on the person behind RM, but also having me think more about a lot of the stuff that I've gone through, and the fact that it kind of feels like this album. I wasn't lying. This album feels like it was a personal call out. And with that being said and done, it is time for me to get into the stereotypical YouTuber outro, where I, as a stereotypical YouTuber, would ask you to do the following for one more time out of this year. Anyway, if you like this video, you can go ahead and press the like button. If you want to go ahead and see more videos like this, you can go ahead and hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to be notified of whenever I post. Any type of questions, comments, concerns, or ideas for future videos can be put into the comments section down below. And with all that being said, my name is Tokiku Uzuru, aka Toki, and this is Toki, also closing out the year by saying Toki out.